Okay, well, what's the significance of all this alienness? Well, for one thing, Bojack's terrified of it. Why? He's scared of being truly and completely alone, for one thing. Right? We know from past seasons and past episodes that he continuously gets his sense of self from other people and from the recognition that other people give him. And if he's completely alone, and if he doesn't understand what other people are signaling to him or communicating to him, he can't get this. But also, here and elsewhere, we know that Bojack gets his sense of control and comfort from understanding the space and place that he's in. We've seen this several times. We've seen him talk about how Los Angeles is a place where it's easy for him to belong, where he can be himself because it makes no requirements on him. But he also keeps on actually giving up on that idea, right, and going other places to try to find himself. We'll see a really important example of that in season 4. But remember, in season 2, he went off to New Mexico to try to find himself, and his idea was that by being in a different place, he could have a different version of himself. If you think about it, right, Bojack is a character who came of age and found his central identity on a sitcom, horsing around. And what does the sit in sitcom refer to? Situation. The whole definition of a sitcom is it has a very small fixed number of sets, and all the action and all the comedy happens within that fixed number of sets, right? That fixed situation. In Horsing Around, it's the dining room and the living room of the Horsing Around house. You see it over and over again. And I think significantly, notice that in the opening sequence of season 3, unlike the other seasons, you see pictures of the set of Horsing Around up on Bojack's wall in the background, right? So he developed his sense of self on Horsing Around in this very limited environment, a set that he knew very well because he went and filmed there in that exact same place over and over and over again. And we know for sure, because it keeps coming up, that that's his comfortable place. That's where he knows how to be himself. That's where he finds his sense of identity, in this very limited physical space that he knows inside and out, and in which he feels very, very at home. So he's developed his ability to feel in control and like himself through his ability to feel at home in his space. And so he's very reluctant to be in this space where he doesn't feel at home at all. Right? He can't situate his sense of self in the underwater world because he has no understanding of where he is. And for the rest of the series, in fact, well beyond this episode, and I want you to track this as you watch, being underwater will become a symbol of being in a foreign, disorienting place where you don't understand who you are and you don't know the rules. Track this. Notice all the times when characters end up underwater, it's a theme that comes back over and over again. And you'll notice that being underwater always symbolizes that moment of alienation and foreignness and not being able to find your sense of self as rooted in a sense of place that you understand, which will tell you sort of how to behave and what to do. Okay. I also think that it's important for him to the impact of being in the underworld is important for him because he is given this task by the narrative of the episode of trying to forge connections with others and act in meaningful ways without any of the normal help that you get from being in a familiar space and understanding the rules, right? He keeps over and over again throughout this episode needing to try to connect with other characters and communicate with other characters. But he has to find ways of trying to do this that don't depend on his normal repertoire or any of our normal repertoire, right? That don't depend on his comfortable understanding of how you talk to people, how you introduce people, yourself to people, what kind of people there are around you, how you move around. Even, look, think about this. Think about how when you go to a party and you want to meet people and connect with people, you kind of know how to move around that party, right? You know what rhythm to use to move through the space, like how close to stand to a group of people you want to talk to. It would be weird to like get all the way in their face, but also you're not going to talk to them if you're far away. And you don't want to stay too long, but you also don't want to stay too short. We have a bodily rhythm And we know how to do it. We know how often to like go get a drink and sip our drink and how to make eye contact and how to move through a crowd. All of that is because we're familiar with that kind of space. But it's very hard to make connection if you don't understand the space you're in and you don't even understand how to move through that space. And that's really what Bojack's facing. And yet he manages to do it, which is kind of surprising. What we see in this episode is a surprising side of Bojack, right? That he's actually able to act well without any of his normal props and crutches that he thinks that he needs. So, for example, he bonds with the baby seahorse right away without any context at all. Why do they bond, given that he can't use any of his normal social repertoires or strategies? They bond just based on their need for shared connection. Right? He finds himself alone and lost, and that baby is cut off from its family and is dependent on adults for help. And based on their shared connection, they bond. This is not a thing that Bojack is usually able to do out of any kind of familiar context. This takes us, I think, to the second theme that I wanted to talk about in this episode, which is the theme of Sartre and radical freedom, Jean-Paul Sartre and radical freedom. In the environment that he finds himself, because he has no idea how to understand his environment, he has no idea what the expectations are, he has no choice but to act and make choices based just on his free will, right? He can't act by just conforming to social expectations or by following the rules or by doing what people tell him to do, because there just aren't any, right? There are no social expectations on him that he understands. There are no rules that he understands. Nobody is telling him what to do. The space around him, the physical space around him, is not one that he knows how to interpret. He doesn't know how it is telling him what to do, right? Normally spaces do tell us what to do. We see a turnstile, we know we're supposed to go through it, and we know we're supposed to pay to go through it. We see a bathroom door, we know that there's a bathroom on the other side and that that's what we go through to get to the bathroom. But in this space that he's in, there's no cues as to what he's supposed to do, right? Nothing tells him, go through this door, pay here, do any of that. And because he's in an environment that gives him no cues, he has no choice but to act based on what Sartre would call radical freedom, right? To just pick his action and stick with it. Sartre argues that no matter how much your choices feel like they're conditioned by your own history or by the pressures around you or the expectations around you or by what other people ask of you, no matter how much you feel like social rules shape what you can do, ultimately every choice you make is radically free whether you admit this to yourself or not. Right? Ultimately, every choice that you make belongs to you and you have to take responsibility for it. And if you pretend to yourself that you just made it because social rules demanded that that was how you act, or other people told you that you had to do something, or because your history trained you up to act a certain way and you couldn't help it, then you're just fooling yourself. Sartre is uncompromising in this idea that each one of our acts is an act of radical freedom. Now, it goes along with that Sartre is not big on connection, right? Human connection, that is. He thinks that at each moment you need to exercise your freedom by choosing the action that best expresses who you want to be and what you want to do, and you should never be held back by the excuse that you are beholden to specific other people and their needs and their expectations. Right? So to put this in very concrete, mundane terms, right? Here's an example that might speak to many of you. When you're in college, you need to choose a major. Sartre would say that what major you choose is an act of radical freedom on your part, and nobody is responsible for that choice but you. Now imagine you have parents who are saying, well, I don't want you to be a philosophy major because that's some sort of intellectual thing that I don't understand. I want you to be a major that will let you go to medical school. That's your only choice. I'm only going to support you if you choose something like biology that will let you go to medical school, because that's what I want out of your life. Now, you might say to yourself, well, I guess I don't have a choice of major, right? I love my parents. I'm beholden to them. I have obligations to them, and they're telling me this is what I have to do. So I'm going to major in biology. And if somebody says to you, well, why did you choose biology? You might say, well, I didn't really choose it. I did it because my parents told me to do it. And I had to do it because I had obligations to them. Sartre will say, doesn't matter how much other people tell you you have obligations, ultimately your choice is yours and you have to own it and you have to take responsibility for it. And if you picked biology, you have to own the fact that that was your choice. Even if somebody else was telling you that you had to do it, ultimately these claims that other people make on you do not determine your choice. Your choice is your own. And so you better pick something that you feel okay about owning. And if you don't feel okay about owning biology, then don't pick it, because that choice will be who you are and not who your parents are, whether you want it to be or not, and whether or not you tell yourself that you only did it because your parents told you to do it. So nothing special about majors. That's just an example that I thought might be helpful for explaining the idea. The result of this is that Sartre can support some pretty cruel choices. So he has a famous example where somebody is picking whether to stay home and care for his dying mother who wants him to stay home or go off and fight Nazis. And he's completely contemptuous of the idea that this person might choose to stay with their dying mother just because he feels obligated to her. Right? So he's not big on the claims that connections and other people can make. He has a pretty radically individualist picture of what sort of choices we can make. He writes, to choose this or to, let me get the quote right. He writes, to choose this or that is to affirm the value of what you chose. In other words, when you make a choice, your choice is directly what you value. Remember the Nietzschean point, the existentialist point. There's no separate you there behind your actions. Your actions just are you. So if that's what you choose, then that's what you value. So if you choose biology, then you have become a person whose value was to be a biology major. And you don't get to say, oh, I just did it because my parents made me, right? Even if that is what influenced you, ultimately it was your choice. And so that choice now becomes the kind of person you are and the kind of values you have, as much as you might want to say, oh, no, I'm just reflecting my parents' values, not my values. I think that there's a lot that's useful in this view, but people get frustrated with Sartre for how unyielding he is on the irrelevance of other people's claims on us. And this is one of my favorite things about the episode. We don't have to guess whether this is relevant to how to interpret the episode, because Bojack tells us this right at the beginning, right? The very beginning of the episode, before we even get to the opening credits. He's complaining that he doesn't want to go to the underworld. And Anna tells him, well, you have to because you can't go to France because the French don't like you. And he says, oh, because they didn't like my critique of Sartre. But his philosophical arguments helped tyrannical regimes justify overt cruelty, and I stand by that. So he actually tells us that the episode is about Sartre, basically, and he gives us his critique of Sartre. It sounds like a throwaway line, but it's in fact a serious theme of the episode. Right? How did Sartre's philosophical arguments help tyrannical regimes justify overt cruelty? Well, by telling people that all of their choices should be about maximizing and expressing their own freedom and values, and to hell with the impact on other people. Right? Sartre didn't argue directly that that meant you should be cruel and violent, but Bojack's right that that can justify a lot of tyranny, right? Because if you refuse to take seriously the moral claims that other people make on you, then it's very easy for you to become a tyrant who exerts your power without concern for other people. And that's a bit of a distortion of Sartre, but he's right that it's an easy distortion of Sartre. Okay, this section is long enough, so let me pause and go on to the next.